So I've got an office at the University of Arizona. I've got a cubicle at the Phoenix office, and I bounce between the three. But this is my best office.
Gotcha.
I do like the book collection in the background. That's something I keep wanting to do in my house, is like trying to get a better bookshelf for all these things. Like I have a tiny bookshelf, and then I've got some other bad ones. But it's like I want a way to display them. I don't know. Maybe I should bring them to the office and do it.
Yeah,
too.
I had little bookshelves all over the house, in the bedroom and downstairs, some in the garage, and that's why I got this. And like everything's here, and I'm working, and I want to look at some book. I just spin around, grab it off the shelf. I love it.
Mm-hmm. It looks good visually too. You look smarter with all those books behind you. Maybe that's what I should do. Only I'd put them all like upside down and backwards. Most of them Harry Potter.
I used to joke that I all my self-help books are like out of view. Stress, anxiety, become a better you.
Trail coloring books and stuff like that hanging around.
Yeah.
Are you a big reader, Jim?
I love to read, but I don't read much. I don't know if you could. I've got 2 stacks that are 1.5 feet high of magazines over here, and they're a mixture of magazines and books that just piled up. And I'm honestly so busy writing and producing stuff that I don't have time to read, to consume it. And I love to read. There's some books on Teddy Roosevelt and things I just love to dig into. Mm-hmm. And I don't know.
It is so hard to find time to do it, especially when you love something so much. Like, I want to read this, or even just a side book. Do you want to read this for educational purposes? Like, how to get the time with everything else we're doing nowadays is time's always. If we could figure out how to add more hours to the day, well, I'd be all about it.
Yeah, I know it. Reading doesn't make me money either. I mean, a good writer is supposed to be well read, and that's very true. But it's a finite amount of time.
Yeah. Well, thanks for jumping on with us today, man. We appreciate it. I know internally we've always talked. We've always had you on the list. I think you've been at the very tip top of Brady's list forever and ever. And then I've gotten a chance to get to know you a little bit. And I know that the interactions I've always had with you, I've always been like, man, that guy's so fascinating. You're a good storyteller and also just a super interesting person to talk to. So we appreciate it.
Likewise, when you guys talk about like biology stuff, not just the hunting, but you always get it right. You do a good job.
That's good.
I don't know. To that point, recently I've been talking to Brady saying I think we probably need to induce a fact check at the end of this, because I say things and then I go back and I think about them and I'm like, I don't know actually if that's true or not. I should probably go back and fact check that. So maybe today at the end we'll probably do some fact checking. But I know you're super busy, so I appreciate you jumping on.
Well, who's going to fact check me though? That's the problem.
Nobody.
You're the expert. You don't need to be fact checked.
You're the voice.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Brady, you pulled some background. Give us an intro to Jim Heffelfinger.
I don't even know if this is going to do it well enough. And I was trying to think of a way to do this because to me, you're the man, the myth, the legend, everything when it comes to deer. I can't wait to dive into all deer, mule deer. We're going to jump into some other little caveats too. But I pulled it from your website, so hopefully it's accurate. So I want to read it directly.
Yeah, hopefully.
You guys do pretty well. So you're certified wildlife biologist with degrees in wildlife management, University of Wisconsin, Texas A&M University. You've worked as a biologist for the federal government. I don't think I knew that you worked for the federal government before. State wildlife agencies, universities, private sector in Texas, New Mexico, Arizona. And here's the awesome part this is why I wanted to have you on. Jim has authored and co-authored dozens of scientific papers, 20 book chapters, more than 200 magazine articles in national and regional publication, and you're currently chairman of the Western Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies Mule Deer Working Group, which comprised of mule deer experts from each of the 24 Western states, provinces, and territories. So that's why you are so full of information, right?
Does that say only 200 magazine articles? Because it was 300 a long time ago.
Yeah.
See, that's the hard part. You got to constantly stay updated with that. So every time I pull stuff up, I'm like, oh yeah, Jim's part of that. He's been a little sample here and there.
I like to write. It's fun, and being as a wildlife science coordinator for Arizona Game and Fish, I do a lot of science stuff, and also I'm adjunct faculty at University of Arizona, and so my office is on campus with the wildlife faculty there. So I interact in the scientific community all the time, but my passion, my interest is always to take that science and the real technical stuff and boil it down and just write about it in plain language that people can just understand. There's so many cool things when it comes to everything, antlers and genetics and topics that are kind of complex. And if you can just forget about the jargon and just talk about it in plain language, it's really interesting. Really
Mhm.
cool stuff going on.
Yeah, I've always said like knowledge is power, and that's why I
Hmm.
think like everything I try to look at, I try to root it in. Okay, what's biologists say? Because everything to me, like what a deer does on a daily basis, like that's the more interesting thing to me than like sure you can always listen to some big buck hunt stories and
Yep.
get some tactics that way, but it's like when you dive down and start really looking into the biology, like what are they eating, what do they need for water, what are the habitats they live in, like that's where you start getting all those little like nuggets of information like oh I could
Hmm.
use that on my hunt, or it might not be like a study in the exact area you're hunting, but you can use some of
Right.
that information to extrapolate that to a different
Hmm.
state or a different habitat and be like, okay, this is what they talk about in here. Our mule deer doing the same thing in that area, and it's like
Yeah.
that's what's so cool to
Yeah.
me.
And the
Like,
more different sources you read, the more you see things starting to knit together,
mhm.
like consistency. Like you look, well, if you look at a project where they have GPS collars on mule deer bucks, and they find they're staying in this one elevational range where there's most of the shrubs are. And then, that might be in the Rocky Mountains. And you look in the Southwest, and like Cow's white-tailed deer, there's a study done by a friend of mine. It was back in the 70s, so it wasn't GPS collars, but he was looking at just observing deer where they were, and he mapped that they were staying in this shrub layer between these elevational bands. And you start getting this different sources of information that are kind of similar, and you start seeing those bucks are hanging out where the browse is, where they've got thermal cover and they can get out of the sunlight, or on a cold wind they can get out of the cold wind, and then that's where the food is. They can bed, they can get up, feed, go back down to bed without moving much. So you start kind of knitting all that together like a jigsaw puzzle.
Mhm.
When did you fall in love with deer?
I wasn't. I was an undergraduate. I went to the University of Wisconsin Stevens Point, and it was in central Wisconsin. And everybody wanted to be a deer biologist. Everybody wanted to be the Wisconsin DNR deer biologist. And I don't like jumping on the bandwagon and doing what everybody else wants to do. But we had 20 to 25 wolves in the state. I wanted to be a wolf biologist. That
Mm.
sounded really cool. So I'm an undergraduate. I'm not interested in deer because everybody else is interested in deer. And then fast forward, I'm working on deer quite a bit. And actually, towards the end of my career, I mean, the last 15 years, I've been working on Mexican wolf recovery in the Southwest too. And that wasn't like I long ago lost my interest in working on wolves and just dove into deer and ungulates and hooved animals with horns and antlers. But we're not talking about wolves today, but I was asked to be on the wolf recovery team specifically because of my knowledge of deer and the prey that they eat. And that if you're going to talk about recovering wolves, you better start, you got to have somebody that knows something about the prey base and potential impacts of the prey base. So that's how I got roped into doing wolf stuff more recently.
Right. Yeah. Do you? When did you move out west?
I finished my bachelor's degree in central Wisconsin in '86, and then wanted to go on to get a master's degree. And they were hard to get at that time, really hard to get. And
Yeah.
I lucked into one in South Texas working on coyote predation on trophy whitetails and in the South Texas brush country. So I did 2.5 years of master's degree research there, published a thesis on that. And that time in the cactus and the coyotes and the sunsets and not shoveling snow, I said, I don't want to go back to the Midwest. I want to stay in the Southwest. And
Yeah.
so after I graduated with a master's degree, I only applied for Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona and that was at a time where jobs weren't easy to find, but I knew I wanted to stay in the Southwest. I just loved the Southwest, and got a job in South Texas as a wildlife biologist for a ranch, and we had trophy hunts in South Texas, and then the federal connection you mentioned before was a short stint with the Bureau of Land Management in Carlsbad, New Mexico. And I was there only 3 months, and already saw there was a lot of bureaucracy and paperwork, and I was shocked by that because I thought if I could just be a biologist for the federal government, that would be like the pinnacle of someone's career. Like you work for the government, that would be so neat. And I got in there, and it was just reviewing environmental assessments and designating backcountry byways and a lot of kind of recreation stuff. And I wanted to work with animals. I wanted to work with the hunting community. And while I was there only a couple months, Arizona Game and Fish called me up and said, "Hey, we found this application. when I was applying for all 3 states. And we've got this regional biologist position for southeastern Arizona. You're managing cows, whitetail, desert mule deer, pronghorn, mountain lions, black bears, 3 species of quail, turkey. I missed a few. I said, that sounds fantastic. Gould's turkey, restoring Gould's turkeys of southeastern Arizona. I said, that's what I was looking for. You want to do radio telemetry in plains. You want to capture animals and capture bighorn sheep. And that's what I did for 23 years for Arizona Game and Fish. And then the last 10 years, I've been more of a statewide. My position's called Wildlife Science Coordinator. So I'm kind of a science advisor to the agency as a whole to make sure that we've got a good scientific underpinning to the decisions we make and the policies that we make.
Gotcha. Do you get in the field a lot still, or is it more desk stuff?
No, but when it's 117 degrees, I don't really miss the field that much anymore. Most of my field work is just during the hunting seasons, really, and I don't miss that. The field was fun, but I'm just involved in so many interesting things. I'm really happy what I'm doing.
Yeah, I promised Brady I wouldn't dominate and ask a bunch of questions because I know he loves mule deer. I mean, I love deer too, but I love elk, so I'm going to let him run with some questions and let him dive in. But and probably some of these will be the same, so I'll let him jump in. But I will dive into mule deer. So pretty much across the West, we hear so much that decline of mule deer. It seems like when I was, I think probably 16, 17 was about the time frame they offered the last lifetime license in the state of Utah. People could buy, I think it was $500 at the time. You could buy a lifetime license, which essentially, give you a deer tag every single year. But then we went to a draw. I didn't buy a lifetime license at the time because I was like, why would I buy a lifetime license? I could just buy one, every single year. There's deer everywhere, right? And I think probably most of my adult hunting lifetime, it just seems like it's this continual chatter of like this downfall of mule deer.
Yeah.
What's the future of mule deer? So what is maybe just, and I don't know if you can speak to like regionally, but what is like the current state of mule deer and where we headed?
I'm really glad you talked about this mule deer decline, because if mule deer were declining for all of these years that people are saying that mule deer are in decline, we wouldn't have any mule deer left.
Right.
People have been, here's the deal. They fluctuate through time, of course, decade by decade. And, there were some really high mule deer populations in the West in the 50s and 60s. There was a lot of heavy grazing, which actually in a lot of cases is bad for mule deer. But in some cases, if it promotes shrub growth, which is not a good thing really for native habitat, to have cattle grazing so intensively that now you're getting shrub encroachment. But if you're a mule deer, those shrubs are valuable. And we had a lot of fires back then, a lot more burning, a lot less urban encroachment, less highways cutting off migration routes, all kinds of things that benefited mule deer. So we had these real high mule deer populations in the 50s and 60s, and people sometimes refer to those as the good old days. And, we really want to work our way back to those, but we can't go back there. That was, the 60s was 65 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Our West has changed quite a bit in 65 years, and a lot of the habitat's gone. It's not there anymore. So we can't be looking at those good old days and try to get deer populations back. We've got to work with the habitat that we have now. And so we chugged along with populations fluctuating decade to decade. And then in the 1990s, mule deer seemed to be declining everywhere throughout the West. And the directors get together once or twice a year in this organization called the Western Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies. And the directors talk to each other, directors of state wildlife agencies. And one director's like, I'm getting chewed up because my mule deer population declining. And all of a sudden the directors realized they were all kind of in the same boat. Mule deer were declining everywhere. And so we need to get some experts together and find out what's going on, what's causing this west-wide mule deer decline. So they assembled the Mule Deer Working Group, which I was one of the first members of the group, and that was in 1998, late 90s. So we got together, and I became the chair of that eventually. I was representing Arizona initially, and then I've been the chairman of that group for the last 20 years. And we still get together. We are the most active working group in the Western Association. We get together and we produced a lot of things. We have a website, muledeerworkinggroup.com, just all one word. We have all of our resources there. And we got together and we started talking about what things are affecting mule deer populations, what could potentially affect mule deer populations. And from that stemmed a lot of information and documents. But what we found in that group starting in the late 90s was that there was not one thing that was causing mule deer declines throughout the West. And that's kind of the way everybody was thinking. What's causing this? We found that mule deer populations, if you have a series of droughts in the Southwest, deer populations down there decline, but they may do really well in the Rocky Mountain states during those years because there's not much precipitation. So if you have not much precipitation, you have less harsh winters in the Rocky Mountains, but you have drought in the Southwest. And then you get into a series of years with a lot more winter precipitation. And so the desert populations do really well because winter rainfall means forbs and plant growth and nutrition. But a lot of precipitation in the winter in the Rocky Mountains means harsh winters and winter kill. And so in retrospect, we looked back after talking about this and we saw that it just seemed like it was synchronized in the 90s, causing deer populations to decline, but it wasn't one thing. It was just kind of a synchrony thing. And then as we came out of the 90s in the last 20 years, 25 years, we've seen all these populations recover to some, all but a few recover to some degree as the drought abated, and as we didn't have harsh winters for a number of years, we had some mild winters in the Rocky Mountain states. So most deer populations rebounded, not all the way though, but probably even 5 years ago, we had most populations stable or increasing. Mm-hmm. Now, in the last 5 years, some things have happened. We had the winter of 2022 and 23 was a super harsh winter in the northern Rockies, killed a lot of deer in some of those states. And then in the last 3 or 4 years in the Southwest, West Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, we've had really bad drought. I mean, it's just been bad. And we've, even in Arizona, we've decreased tags 20% just in the last 4 years or so. So we're responding to drought in the Southwest, and populations were hit hard in the Rocky Mountains in the winter of 22. But now some of those responding after those kills, there's more food for the remaining deer and they tend to bounce back. But right now where we're at is about 23 western states and provinces in Western North America that have mule deer. And there's 11 of those that are declining now. And a lot of that's just because of that winter and the drought that I'm talking about. And about 4 of them are increasing and 6 of them are stable. What we do in the mule deer work group is we look, I mean, if you say our mule deer population increasing or decreasing in a particular state, even if you looked over the last 25 years, you probably see they're declining. The line would be down. If you look in the last 10 years, some of those, the population's increasing. Like Arizona had a good, strong 15 years of good, solid increase right before the last few years of drought. So that would be increasing. If you look at just the last 3 years, Arizona is definitely decreasing. So the time scale makes all the difference in the world. So what we said in the mule deer working group is every year we're going to put together a summary of mule deer and black-tailed deer populations, and the standard is going to be the last 3 years. Mm-hmm. And we just decided on that because that tells you kind of what's going on right now, just in the last couple of years, not 10 years ago. And so the document we have that you can link in the show notes, it's on the Mule Deer Working Group website, has a document of the status of mule deer and black-tailed deer populations. And it goes jurisdiction by jurisdiction because you can't answer the question about how are mule deer populations doing in the West in general. There's just too much diversity and different things going on. But that document goes Alaska, Arizona, Alberta, agency by agency, with that expert from that jurisdiction writing about what's going on this year in that population. It's really valuable, valuable resource, and you can look through and get an idea of how things are going.
Gotcha. Is that the 2025 range-wide status of black-tailed deer document? Okay.
Yep, exactly. We do that every year, and we take down the past years to avoid confusion, so there'll just be the 2025 posted.
Mm-hmm. And does a 3-year thing allow like states and agencies to then manage it rather than looking at 20 years of whatever might not make sense, so they can actually react a little bit easier with a 3-year?
Yeah, the 3 years is mostly just for us to summarize what's going on jurisdiction by jurisdiction. Each individual agency is using all kinds of different things for management decisions themselves and what they're doing. And every agency has developed different management plans, different management completely. But the 3-year thing is for us to summarize it range wide. Everybody's kind of interested in what we're talking about today, and you can't go and talk to all the individual biologists. You get a big mishmash of stuff. So here's a place where you can go and just kind of read through what's going on with the species throughout the West.
Yeah, and it's such a public perception thing, right? I mean, we like to look back and we like to say what was should be once again. If you look at the range conditions that created the populations that we saw in maybe the 50s and the 60s, we're not ever going back to that, right? And reality is, the way I understand it, at least makes sense to me, is that those were probably overinflated populations based on management for one type of species, maybe livestock, right? Sheep, cattle, production. And now, we're at a time frame where we're managing for multiple use, whether that's for livestock grazing on the landscape, as well as elk, mule deer, pronghorn, whatever it might be. So it's just like it's more of like a new social norm that we just need to adopt, that like, we're not going back to that, because what was probably overinflated, probably wasn't great on the ecosystem as a whole. And, what is what we've got now. And these are the issues that we're working with. So it almost just seems like we just need to accept socially the new norm, and I guess the reason I asked the question is because I wanted to get an idea from your perspective. Are you optimistic or are you, pessimistic about the future of mule deer hunting?
Yeah, I'm optimistic about most things just in general, and I'm really excited about when we talk about we have to socially accept where we're at. That doesn't mean that we're happy with the number of mule deer that we have. It just means that the landscape has changed tremendously in 65 years, and let's be realistic about what we can accomplish on the landscape. And if you work with your individual state or province on pushing them to focus on mule deer habitat, that's what we need to do. Is let's focus our efforts and do everything we can with what habitat we have. And I'm really optimistic because 20 years ago, you didn't have the focus on restoring and protecting migration corridors. You didn't have such a focus on big landscape scale habitat improvement. You would have an agency or BLM or Forest Service go in to do a little burn in one area, or do a little mastication where they grind up the brush and the vegetation to get regrowth. And it was kind of a little postage stamp here and there. And now in the last couple of decades, we're thinking so much about landscape scale. I mean, meaningful changes across the landscape and changing forest management in such a way that improves mule deer carrying capacity, mule deer habitat. So I see all this big thinking, big landscape focus by a lot of really smart people. And you've got University of Wyoming and the Wyoming Migration Initiative. You've got some of these places doing, and BYU with Randy Larson and all of his students, and Brock McMillan doing really, really, really good stuff with big sample sizes. And that makes me excited. I mean, we're doing some great stuff. It's not doom and gloom. Oh, the mule deer are declining. Things are horrible. We're doing some really cool stuff.
Yeah. No, I agree. No, it is, and I'm glad that she says it, because I kind of feel the same way. You can't really dictate what Mother Nature gets you. And as you spoke there, I kind of would identify, some key like pillars, right? So you're talking things like migration corridors. You're talking drought. You're talking winter mortality due to some bad winters. You're talking about habitat and habitat degradation and loss. But maybe we can, and then predation, I guess, which is one I should throw in there on top of that, because people love to talk predators, but maybe we can pick those individually apart a little bit. Predators, people love predators, right? They love to talk predators. Usually if you read through any Facebook forum or any kind of Instagram post, it's the first thing, hey, there's too many damn lions on the landscape. We need to kill them all. We need to do coyote predation. But have we learned anything that we can actually point back to?
Yeah, the mule deer work group, and just exactly what you said. When we got together in '98, we got all the mule deer experts and black-tailed deer experts in a room, and we started saying, well, what's impacting populations? And then we came up with 7 topics in that could be impacting populations, and we based a lot of things we did on those topics. And one of them was predation, and we actually did a little exercise. I don't know if you've ever, I hate these exercises where they give you some 3 sticky dots, and you go up on the thing and you put dots what you think is most important. We went through all that. I hate it, but it was valuable. And not many biologists that are familiar with mule deer population dynamics put sticky notes by predation as something that was really driving the decline, or something really depressing mule deer populations. But we recognized that wasn't one of the biggest things. Habitat came out to be one of the biggest things that we needed to focus on, and environmental factors like winter kill and drought you can't do much about, but that's really impacting deer populations. But even though predation wasn't one of the things that we thought, well, this is what's, mule deer throughout the West in the late 90s weren't declining because all of a sudden predators ate them all. It just didn't make any sense. But we recognized what you were saying was, this is what everybody's talking about, predation and predators. So we probably need to hit that head on. And that was one of the first things we did, even though it wasn't one of the highest priorities for affecting west-wide mule deer decline, is we put together a paper, and we published it in the Wildlife Society Bulletin, which is peer-reviewed papers. And we put together a paper on mule deer and black-tailed deer predator relationships in the West. And that was about 2000. I think it was 2000, 2001 when that was published. And we have a lot of information about coyotes and whitetails, but we focused on what research was done. That was 25 years ago. There's been a lot of good stuff since then. But back then we put it together and we summarized, under what conditions does predator control seem to benefit deer populations? And we listed that. And that paper received the Wildlife Society's Publication of the Year Award for a peer-reviewed paper that year, because it was mule deer focused, and there wasn't much out there at that time on just focusing on mule deer and predation. But a couple of things that we listed in there were things like, if you're going to do predator control to help deer populations, you better hammer that predator population. You can't go in there and remove 20% of the coyote population and think you're going to save some fawns. You can't on your deer hunt shoot 2 coyotes and say, there, I saved some fawns. Yeah, you may have saved a fawn or 2, but on a population level, you didn't do anything. And so you have to, if you're going to do control for the purpose of benefiting deer, you've got to really hit those populations intensively. And then there's the issue of area scale. You can't depress a predator population intensively over a giant area. Even one game management unit in a state, really difficult to reduce 60% of the coyote population. That's really hard. So think about scale. I mean, if you're interested in one particular part of a game management unit, then focus on that. And then there's timing. You can't just go out there and shoot a coyote in December and say you saved a fawn that's going to be born in August. It's not going to make any difference at all. Actually, our fawns are born in August, but it would be earlier for most of the mule deer range. But the timing of it, I mean, go in there and do it right before the vulnerable period, whether it's predators on winter range or whether it's coyotes eating fawns. And so hit them intensively, hit them in a focal area, hit them right before you need those populations depressed. And there was a couple other things that we laid out in the publication, but speaking in those kind of terms gets away from predator control is bad or predators are bad. Let's talk about the real issues. This is reality. You've got to hit them hard. You've got to hit them in a local area. You got to hit them right before you need them. That's just the reality of how that works. And now, if someone wants to propose predator control to help their deer population, well, let's think of it in those terms. Will what you're proposing do that?
Yeah. In your opinion, is it feasible? Is it realistic?
No, that was another one too, is the cost. It's just so expensive. The deer that you save, and you will save deer if you go in there and hammer that's what my master's degree actually was on. You will save deer, but it's a matter of cost. We went in there and we killed, I for my master's degree, just killed the snot out of coyotes in a 10,000 acre area on a ranch. And we had radio collared deer on that area and on another area that we left the coyotes alone. Because in South Texas, after the rut, those coyotes are hunting in packs, in groups like wolves, and they're dragging down big mature whitetail bucks after the rut, because the whitetail bucks have lost like 20% of their body weight in the rigors of rut. They just want to recuperate and hang out, and these groups of coyotes were ganging up on them, and the coyotes were focusing on killing mature bucks in South Texas, where they're selling mature bucks at that time for $3,500. Now it's a lot higher than that, but at that time it was, high dollar for a mature buck. And so this research was, if we go in there and we pound that coyote population right before the rut, and so that post-rut period has lower coyote populations, can we save mature buck? And when all the dust settled, after all the research and statistical analysis, we found that we saved a few mature bucks, but the cost of coyote control over 10,000 acres was not made up for with those few bucks, even if you could sell them, basically, even if you could have a hunter take those and pay for them. Right. It wasn't worth the money. And that's the case in a lot of areas.
Yeah. And it must be too, like, just like the scale and the time. Like, probably can't go in there just 1 year and think you're making a dent. It's probably like a 5, 10, 15-year type of thing, which, then that cost adds up exponentially.
Yeah. See, if you're going to do it, it's more than a 1 year commitment. One year bump in fawn survival is not going to get you a whole lot, even if you're successful that 1 year. Mm-hmm. And we had kind of an internal policy when we did predator control for pronghorn herds, our little isolated pronghorn herds. They're isolated in the valley, so you can make a difference if you go in and clear out some coyotes right before the fawn drop. We just had a policy that we would not do it for less than 3 years in a row. Mm-hmm. If you're going to do it, you're going to do it for 3 years in a row in that population.
What about lions?
Lions is and I mentioned that we, in the last 25 years, we've got a lot of good research. Idaho had Mark Hurley did a giant study in Idaho, and that was coyotes and lions. That was really informative. Utah is getting some really good information with all of their collared deer and their what we call cause-specific mortality. What's killing those radio-collared deer? So we've got some really good information on that. And Hurley's work showed that if you hit lions really hard, you can improve adult female doe survival. So it depends on how much money you're spending to kill those lions and how much benefit you're getting out of that population. What I thought was fascinating with some of the Utah information is they have survival rates and body fat information from like all of their game management units, or most of them, because they just have 1,500 GPS collars out at any given time in the state. So they had a case where people said predators are killing all the deer, you need to do predator control. And they looked at the body condition, the amount of fat on the does in all these game management units, and they looked at what was killing those does, or radio-collared does, and they showed that in a lot of game management units, it was nutrition that was limiting the deer population, because the does didn't have good fat. And if you go in there and do predator control in that case, the remaining does are just not going to have much fat and not be very productive. But there was other areas where does were fat, they were in good condition, and they were getting hammered by lions. And so there they had the data to show, look, it's not nutrition in this unit because the deer are in good physical condition, but mountain lions are killing a lot of them. And so there's an area where you would go in and focus your lion control in that case. If the deer are not getting enough groceries, predator control is not what you do. You start looking and see why they don't have the body fat they should have going into winter. And if an agency has that kind of information to manage by, you can make those really informed decisions. Unfortunately, a lot of us don't have that kind of detailed information. It's pretty expensive.
Sure.
What are some of the costs of some of these studies? Is that like always a limiting factor, like a GPS study or like a habitat work? Like, what's some of that cost?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't have those numbers. I'm not in the position where I'm ordering radio collars and organizing research projects like that. Mm-hmm. So I don't know some of those costs, but GPS collars are getting cheaper and cheaper. Mm-hmm. When you buy a collar and hang it on a deer, that's not the only cost. You have to pay for a monthly subscription to the collar or the service to get the data. So I don't have any dollar figures on that. It's not cheap, but it's not, as Utah and some other places have shown, it's not cost prohibitive. I mean, you get some funding and you can put some serious numbers out there on the ground.
Gotcha. Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know. You talk about predators. It almost seems like coyote control on a large scale that would be meaningful is almost just like a red herring, right? It's just something that you shouldn't throw money at. It just seems like you'd be better off throwing money towards something that actually impacts like winter range or seed post.
That's what I've always said. it all boils down to, not all of it, because we talked about several factors, but what's really important is what percent of the coyote population are you removing?
Right.
I mean, if it's 10%, you're not. All you're
Yeah.
doing is just skimming a little bit of the surplus off that's going to die anyway.
Right.
Going to disperse and die anyway. So it's kind of with predator control. It's like, okay, first of all, are predators impacting the deer population? Like in Utah, in some units, they found that it's not really what's impacting the population. If they are, is there something you can do about it cost
Yeah.
effectively? Can you really do anything about it? Maybe you can. And
Yeah.
if you can, in some case, can you do something about it? There's a third one, and that's the social aspect. Should you do something about it? Sometimes, in some cases, like maybe around Tucson, that has a lot of the major headquarters for the environmental animal rights organizations, maybe there's some cases where socially, for your agency, you're not going to get much benefit, but you're going to take it. You should be raked over the coals in the media. Maybe it's not worth it for the little benefit that you get out of there.
Right. Can we switch gears and talk drought and talk winters? So
Yeah, unfortunately, that's not
yeah,
as fun as talking predators.
yeah, yeah. It's not as sexy, right?
Yeah,
Uh, it seems like we're in this cycle, right, where it seems like we're increasingly getting like longer stretches of drought. So we'll get, what might
yeah,
have been a year is now seems like it's 2 years or 3 years. And then in more recent memory, and I think it's important to like think about it in time frame, because we do love our memories are pretty short, right? We don't look at large, like, back in time. But I'm curious as to, so we get these droughts, and then we get like a bad winter. It seems like in some of the more northern states anyway, right? And then we'll have like these massive winter kills. Um, is one worse than the other? I mean, what does drought do to deer?
I never thought about. That's a good question. I never thought about it as you asked it like that. Is one worse than the other? I mean, one of the differences with winter kill, you'll just get like a month and bam, it pounds that population. You got dead animals everywhere. With drought, like we've got a couple of years of drought, the deer are walking around with their rib cage showing, and it's really sad when you look out in the desert around Tucson. You drive and you walk around and look, and everything is just so dusty and crispy, and you think, if I was a desert mule or doe, I don't, man, it's just sad. Like, what are they eating? They're eating dry browse, and
Yeah,
they can eat really dry vegetation, not grass, but dry forbs and dry browse, leaves on shrubs. But they've got to have some water. They've got to have drinking water to get in their rumen. They're like cattle with a four-chambered stomach. They have to ruminate and process that food in there. So they can, if you get a lot of rainfall and you have all these succulent forbs that are full of water, they can eat those. And a lot of times they won't even need to drink water. There's so much moisture in the
hmm,
food that they get it in their rumen, and they can churn that around, and they spit it up just like cattle. They chew their cud, they spit it up, chew it, swallow it again. And they can do that when they're eating all dry food. They got to have some liquid. They've got to be able to drink free water at that time. And that's why we operate hundreds and hundreds of these water catchments in a lot of western states do, to capture rainwater, hold them throughout the year, and provide them in a little drinker there. They need that free water to get some moisture in their room and then process that. So drought then happens at a long, slow attrition of body condition,
hmm,
and them, hopefully not dying, but a lot of times just dying from malnutrition. So it's certainly a different process, kind of
yeah.
long, slow, rather than just getting pounded.
Yeah. To that point, this question isn't like directly into like what we can do, but I'm curious, like how long, like on a good wet year, I've always wondered this, right? Because if like relatively good mule deer range, how many days between drinking will a deer go if they've got decent moisture in the vegetation they're eating?
Yeah, I think like on a during the monsoons when everything's lush like that, I don't I don't even think they need to drink much at all. There's
Hmm.
some bighorn sheep in Baja in Mexico that a friend of mine, Dave Brown, he used to work for Game and Fish, started in the 1961, I think, worked for Game and Fish and retired in the 85. Wealth of information, and he always talked about when we were talking about things like this, bighorn sheep that existed in Baja without any free water anywhere within the range that anybody knew about. So if there's enough moisture in that vegetation, with especially desert mule deer, I mean, I think they can go a long time. People have measured how often desert mule deer come in and drink, and the does were drinking like every day, and the bucks were coming in every 4 days. But that's really dependent on what was going on right then when that
Yeah,
master student did that research, and that was like back in the 70s. So those are some numbers, some real numbers and benchmarks that we have, but it just kind of really applies to when they're researching it.
that's
During
interesting.
drought or during wet time, it would be all different than that.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I've always thought maybe like 3 to 4 days when things were, and it's. I mean, you're further south than I am in Arizona, which is drier, more arid than a lot of the stuff I'm hunting here in Utah. But I mean, that would make sense why it's so hard to find a buck on water.
Yep. Yeah,
Yeah.
and then some of his work showed too that like in the summer, like the early archery season, 92% of the visits were during the dark.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, that's why I've seen you running trail cameras. Like,
Yeah,
majority of it's
yeah,
always at
yeah.
night, always early in
See,
the
that
morning.
was
No, I
pre-trail
don't think I got a single daylight photo of a
Yeah.
mature mule deer
Yep.
buck.
Yeah, all that information came pre-trail cam photos. Now we've got all that
Mhm.
information.
yeah,
How can we use some? Is there a way studies will use trail cameras now to try to
Oh, yeah.
like develop things? Because like all that data is sitting there or
Yep.
potentially there that you could go grab. So like there's probably a
Yes.
lot of cool things you could work on
Lots
with
and
the use of trail
yep,
cameras.
lots and lots of that. I would love to see someone data mine a huge data set or a bunch of data sets from out the west and just look at antler growth, antler shedding, when velvet was stripped, these kind of things about watering, time of day they're watering. All that data is just right there, right for the picking.
yeah,
I know hunters will never do it, but it'd be great if hunters could just like, hey, let's collectively send in all this trail cam footage we have throughout the years, and
Yeah,
like,
it
hey,
would
here's
just take someone,
analyze
you
it.
know, yeah, they call that citizen science, and citizen science is good, but there's a lot of crappy stuff out there if quality control is not watched. There's some researchers in air quotes that are just collecting a whole bunch of citizen pictures, and if you're not running that rigorously, um, it can just be a bunch of garbage. But there's potential there, especially like these trail cam pictures, to do some really neat things.
yeah. What's this year looking like as far as moisture content?
This year,
Yeah, this year
yeah.
going into
Yeah, in the Southwest, it's bad. We just got continued. We had very poor winter rains. We have a bimodal rainfall pattern. We get these winter rains that come in October through March, and they'll kind of settle into this low cloud cover all day, and it'll sprinkle all day long, which is great. It just soaks in, and then it gets dry. Then in the spring and the summertime, and then about July 4th, our monsoons start through September, and those are more violent local thunderstorms. But we get about half of our rain in a lot of areas with that. If you go down to southeastern Arizona, you get about 70% of the annual rainfall comes in the monsoons. But that bimodal rainfall, they're both important, and we were already dry from the last couple of years. We didn't get very good winter rains, so we all said we need some good monsoons. We need some good monsoons, and we really didn't get them. I haven't looked at the rainfall totals, but we're probably less than half of a normal monsoon. So it just continued bad news for deer populations. And if you think about desert mule deer, they got pregnant in December, and they're going to have their fawns the first week in August. August 8th around Tucson is the peak of the fawn drop for our desert mule deer, which is pretty late. But
Yeah.
they're going through this monsoon with those fawns in them, and if they didn't get the winter moisture at the beginning of the pregnancy, they really needed the monsoons, and they better find some place that got a little bit of rainfall in the monsoon, or it's not going to be pretty.
Gotcha.
Mhm.
Yeah, and in the northern Rockies and in a lot of places, the winter in the center part of that Rocky Mountains, Wyoming, Idaho, northeast Utah, got hammered in the winter of 22-23, and a lot of those populations are now responding pretty good because you get this big drop in the deer population. Now there's a lot more groceries for the remaining animals, and so you'll get a resurgence. One of the states had like 77% overwinter fawn survival, average is like 50. I mean, that's kind of an example of after you get a decrease in the population, you can really get good survival the next year. And so a lot of states are experiencing that. A couple states increasing, as I mentioned, but but really, even the states that are increasing and stable, they're at a lower number than what they were. I mean, they're depressed from where they were. And in a lot of places, the habitat's there. It's just going to take some favorable years without winter kill and some favorable years in the Southwest to build those populations back up.
Yeah, to fill in, right?
Yeah, and then when you have populations getting low like this, there's that, it takes 5 years to grow a 5-year-old buck, right?
Yeah.
It's not like you're going to bounce back and have a bunch of mature deer out there in year 2 and 3. So just it's going to take some patience in some places.
Yeah, and you got to play that on when you want to hunt, depending on what your priorities are, right? If you want to hunt a big buck, yeah, it makes sense. What about antler growth and moisture? I mean, what is it? And one thing I always hear people always talk about genetics, like, oh, that area doesn't have the genetics for a big buck or whatever. I was curious if you could speak to genetics and speak to feed and antler.
Yeah, certain genetics are heritable, which means that buck fawns will inherit the traits of their father. And their father has big antlers. He's going to throw off more, and on the average, more buck fawns that have bigger than average antlers. Even like things like brow tines, or not brow tines, but drop tines and things that can have a genetic component, or some webbing called palmation. The characteristics or double brow. I've seen double brow tines in South Texas. There was a ranch that was high fenced for about 30 years. And when you look around their trophy room, like 60% of the deer had double brow tines, these whitetails. There's a genetic characteristic. So there's certainly genetics plays a role in antler size. But when you're talking about this area has good genetics, that area has good genetics. When it comes to antler size, it's a three-legged stool. There's genetics, there's age, and there's nutrition. And in that tripod, genetics is a really a minor part of it. So, there is a genetic component to antlers, but nutrition and of course age. I mean, you've got to get 5 to 6 years old in white-tailed deer and even mule deer, maybe a little bit older than that, 6 to 8 to put on really mature antlers. But nutrition plays such a heavy role. And if you've heard of some of the podcasts or publications Kevin Monteith has put out about this, it's called an epigenetic effect or a maternal effect. So that a 5-year-old buck's antler size is closely related to the nutrition that his mother had when he was in the womb, and even the nutrition that his grandmother had. It's a bizarre, but they're finding this is indisputable even in humans and some other animals, and it's called a maternal effect. So the body condition of your mother when she was pregnant with you can carry on your entire life in antler size. And Kevin's written about that and talked about that, and even did his master's degree in South Dakota on some of that work. So it's not just nutrition now, but nutrition throughout your life. And you can imagine, like a bighorn sheep, you're not gonna have the first 3 years of your life in drought, and then your 4th and 5th year all of a sudden start to put on big heavy horns because your bases are set. They're continually growing. You're not just going to all of a sudden turn it on. With antlers, it can change from year to year with good nutrition, but you're always going to be handicapped if you didn't have good nutrition throughout that whole period. You're developing your bases, the diameter of your bases, and things like that right from the start that are hard to change later on.
Yeah,
different research projects in different individual areas, like South Texas whitetails has been pretty well established that April rains are most related to antler size, and in the West with mule deer, it's going to be that winter nutrition of those does, how much good nutrition they carried through the winter at the beginning of that pregnancy, and then on into once they get into the summer, they're normally okay nutrition wise, but how much nutrition they carry through the winter when they're the does with their fawns, but also the bucks coming out of that winter and then putting on that antler growth. If they're not in good physical condition when the antler growth starts, then they're really going to be handicapped.
So what you're saying is a wise hunter would be clued into Randy Larson and your Instagram and Brock McMillan's Instagram pages, and they would be looking at the individual units, and you'd be looking at the health of those does as they publish that information, and you'd probably be putting that in a spreadsheet somewhere. And then And then
Yep.
watching the year over year, the winter, the summer, seeing what kind of moisture it's receiving, and kind of dictating, maybe allowing that if they wanted to hunt, increase their chances of maybe tagging out on a big buck. Huh?
Yeah, that sounds like a GOHUNT article.
Yeah.
No,
Also,
no, you're right. That's definitely related, but also just in any individual winter, if the does are in really good condition, and I don't know if they're getting a lot of fat from the bucks. They're focusing on does
Mhm.
because they're the most important in populations. But if the does have a lot of fat in the game management unit, the bucks do too. The bucks are coming out of that winter period in better condition than maybe other units, and that could be informative for that individual year's antler growth.
Mhm. Interesting.
health of the does, very important.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Kevin Monteith wrote an article once on bighorn sheep, but the gist of the whole article was if you're interested in big horns, and it applies to antlers, you should be focused 100% on getting the females as much nutrition as possible. The
Hmm.
females. As much
Females.
nutrition as possible. That's what his article was about. And it was, I forgot the first part of the title was, but then it was a part of the title, something about female nutrition, and then it was a colon, and then it said, "Can you handle the truth?" EWE for you.
Mhm.
Sheep. Can you handle the truth? Because it was, it's not a popular thing to tell hunters they need to be focused on getting nutrition on the
Yeah.
ground.
Yeah.
So that probably comes into play a lot then too with like the migration on some of these like does to keep them healthy, and like the encroachment of houses and
Yeah.
recreational activity during the winter range, like pushing around some of these does, making them not as healthy during those critical
Yep.
times, and then you're going to lead to potentially having
Yep.
not as big a bucks because these does are going into the winter or through the winter without the optimum
Yeah, or
conditions.
not reaching the winter range, the best winter range, or
Mm-hmm.
just being diverted in suboptimal habitat because of energy development or something else that's pushing them away from where they really want to be.
Hmm.
What are your thoughts on doe harvest?
It's really needed in places, and agencies do that, but they do that very carefully. I mean, agencies that have declining mule deer populations have stopped that or curtailed it. You'll see even when you read our agency by agency review in the 2025 range wide status, you'll see some agencies say, like after the big winter kill in the winter of 22-23, that female harvest was backed way off, and that's just management. That's how we manage deer herds.
Mm-hmm.
um, it's if deer herds are at carrying capacity in a particular area or game management unit, and the browse is being impacted and their nutrition is being impacted, allowing some female harvest and taking those out leaves the rest of them healthier. So it's a good thing, and most agencies are really good about turning that tool off
Mm-hmm.
when it's not needed to manage the population. But a buck only harvest or harvesting bucks affects the age structure of the buck segment of the population. It affects buck-to-doe ratios, but the number of bucks that are harvested doesn't affect the number of fawns that hit the ground. So if you've got a population that really needs to be trimmed back abundance-wise, then you just that's the tool you pull out of the toolbox, and you start killing some females to drop that population down. In the Southwest, we don't have doe harvest because we have low and inconsistent fawn crops every year. And if we history shows that if we go in there and we start killing females, we just reduce the overall population. You've got to have a healthy influx of fawns every year to be able to withstand removing adult females. And our population decline when we have doe harvest, and so it's used only in one place in Arizona, and that's on the Kaibab Plateau. And the Kaibab is really acting like a Utah population. I mean, we had some winter or some fires up on Summer Range up there for a number of years, and that Summer Range just took off. It was just aspen regeneration, browse regeneration, all these really good deer foods that are shrubs that respond favorably after fire just flushed. And we had 100 fawns per 100 does, which is unheard of.
Hmm.
On the average, a stable population in the desert units of the southern 2/3 of the state, an average mule deer population chugs along stable at about 40 fawns per 100 does. And the Kaibab Plateau, they were getting multiple years of 100 fawns per 100 does, and the winter range can't handle that kind of increase in a deer population. It grows and grows and grows and grows because of the summer range conditions, and then all of those mouths have to go down to a restricted winter range and make it through the winter range, and they can devastate that winter range, and then everybody comes back to pregnant and starting to grow antlers in really bad condition, and that's just poor deer management if you're not killing does and keeping it in the population at the appropriate level for the habitat.
You bring up a good point. So you mentioned carrying capacity, and I hear so often a lot of this is just hearsay, so that I keep bringing up. But people will be like, "Oh, I'm out and about. There's habitat everywhere."
Yep.
Right? They're like,
Yep.
The carrying. How do they even know what the carrying capacity should be or could be? One thing that you note there, I think, is interesting that I think it should be said is that when people think about carrying capacity, it's not that you're not just looking at carrying capacity of one range, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think we get pigeonholed into that. Like we get out on the landscape maybe in July when we're out scouting for bucks and we're up there on the summer range and we're looking all around and we're like, man, look at all this habitat.
Yeah.
Yeah, but we're not necessarily thinking through the process of a deer's lifespan, right? That they're going to spend the summer up on top of the mountain and then maybe they're going to spend their winter down by the freeway. And they're blocked off potentially from a bunch of different winter range that they historically might have went out to. But yeah, I mean, I think it's a good point just to point out to folks is like when you think of carrying capacity, you're thinking of an entire lifespan of an animal. You're not necessarily just in winter range or summer range. It's both, and migration.
And the range in between. There's some of the places in the Northern Rockies where they're in migration 4 months out of 12. They're in what we call migration. So migration routes in the Northern Rockies are not conveyor belts where they go, I'm on summer range, now I got to go to winter range, and they go zip. It takes a long time, and they stop over and they hang out and they keep going. And so I was amazed when I first heard that 4 months out of 12 can be in one way or the other in those transition ranges. And the Kaibab Plateau example I had is a perfect example of how you could have 5 times the number of mule deer in the summer up there. There's plenty of food. But you could only have 1/5 of that number down on winter range.
Yeah,
that's interesting.
Can I ask a question about the Kaibab specifically? Because I had a buddy that I said I would ask this question, right?
You can try, but keep in mind I'm 7 hours from the Kaibab. And I don't spend much time there at all. So.
I think you can answer this one. So basically, we've had a big fire year, right, up there in the summer. Like it's been on fire, torched a bunch of acres. I think it was 100. Is it 100,000 acres plus? I think, right?
Yeah, I haven't seen a recent number.
Yeah, neither, but it's big. This question this gentleman asked me was specifically about oak, right? So you're seeing like this flush of young oak coming back, and he was asking me where it's not going to produce acorns. Which would be primarily what I think deer would eat. But will deer eat young oak? Is it?
Yeah. Viable? Oh yeah, they'll eat that gamble oak comes up after a fire, and there's a lot of that up there, and they'll definitely eat those young tender oak leaves. Yeah. There's gamble oak, and there's New Mexican locust that comes back after a fire. There's a plant called ceanothus. That's a buckbrush. Most people call it buckbrush. It's ceanothus. Comes back, and what else? Aspen shoots back after a fire.
Yeah, I think fire in general, all of us, we get this like because of the Monroe, right? The Monroe unit is close to where I grew up and worked on when I worked for the Forest Service. And we get like a pit in our stomach when we see that the Monroe's on fire. I still do. I mean, locally, I follow the pages and everybody kind of is like, oh man, it's awful that the mountain's on fire. But reality is probably one of the best things that could happen to a lot of these areas, right?
Oh yeah. Yeah, fire is awesome. And fire almost always, when you've got like the whole mountain on fire, it's really not the whole mountain on fire. It burns in a mosaic. It gets in these it goes around these wetter areas. And once the fire goes through, you'll see, and we've used in the mule deer working group some pictures of deer walking through the ashes that are still smoking. And there's green stuff here and there. And then if you have any kind of moisture, that sprouts back really fast and at a much higher nutrition. A lot of those nutrients that are locked into like some oak, and that gets burned. All those nutrients don't just disappear. They stay in the system and they go into the soil. And so it's like fertilizing the soil too with nutrients. And those plants are adapted for that. So fire is awesome. Now there are cases where it just burns so hot, it burns all the organic matter out of the soil and you're left with, you're left with like sand and ash, and that does not come back very fast. But that's normally like on a steep slope where the fire just burns super hot and burn the soil out. In most cases, it's burning in this, and the Forest Service will put together a burn intensity map, and you'll see it's burn high intensity, low intensity, and it's exactly what it does, and it's really good.
That's a good tip that I wasn't quite aware of.
Yeah.
That they put out intensity maps. That's
I've seen heat maps of intensity of the
yeah,
fire.
that's interesting.
I've never looked at that either.
Yeah, I don't know either. It's been interesting. So I have a unit in southern Utah I like to hunt that had about an 80,000 acre fire in 2002. And I was out the last couple of weekends hunting with my brother, hunting elk. It's been really interesting to see the transition in my lifetime of that unit. And it feels like right now, like there were years and years and probably decade plus, maybe 15 years, where it was like mostly those early successionals, like grasses, grasses, forbs, that kind of thing. But in the last, I would say probably even like 6 years or so, I just see this like transition from grasses to more browse. So I'm starting to see way more sagebrush, way more bitterbrush.
Mm-hmm.
What's the time frame look like? So if you have a burn, how many years does it take to go from something that's like from those early succession grasses, forbs to like those, I guess, middle succession, like browse species that are good for deer?
Yeah, that's a hard one to answer because like on the Mogollon Rim of Arizona, we've had a fire will come through and the canyon, the whole side of the canyon will be buckbrush the next year. I mean, it's just like it grows up about a foot. It sprouts up. The next year is 2 feet and 3 feet. So like it comes back right away from that fire. Sagebrush is probably, I don't work in the sagebrush community, but it's going to be a little bit longer, a little bit slower growing than some of those fire adapted shrubs that we have. But a number of years, probably, I mean, in 5 years, if shrubs are growing right after the fire, in 5 years, they're going to be in pretty good shape to provide a lot of nutrition. And when you're talking about like clear cutting a forest, you go from a dense forest that the canopy's closed and there's really nothing growing underneath them, and you clear that out. The first 10 years is a really productive phase, and then it's a little less productive but still valuable for another 15 or so. And then once you get 15, 20 years, you get enough trees up there and starts closing in.
So like
blocking out into the sunlight.
That 1 to 15 year window then is probably the most productive, most prolific.
Yeah.
The reason I was giggling is because you said sagebrush community, and I was thinking what a cool community that would be to be a part of. Sounds real hip.
That's the terminology that's used. Yeah. And that sagebrush is really important for winter range. There's a lot of areas where cheatgrass is invaded, and then the cheatgrass burns every year and burns all the sagebrush out. And we've lost so much mule deer winter range throughout the West from invasive grasses introducing a really rapid fire frequency in that sagebrush community, and just whole valleys that no longer have sagebrush, and the mule deer come down from summer range into that valley like they have for eons, and there's nothing to eat. It's just snow. That's sad.
Speaking of cheatgrass, so I was just reading article posted by Wildfile called "Mule Deer Could Lose Half Their Northeast Wyoming Habitat to Cheatgrass Without Help." And then the study is a mule deer response to invasive annual grasses, implications for strategic management in sagebrush priority areas. And the thing that I thought was interesting, so it said mule deer dislike cheatgrass so much that they will avoid an area completely once it contains 20% of the annual invasive grass. And so
I read that same thing. Yep.
Yeah, so 10% or less, deer will still browse. When it covers 10 to 16, they begin to avoid an area, and anything above 20% is utterly unappealing.
Yeah, that was really interesting because we've all kind of known that in general, but that research project put numbers to it. I mean, actual data, collected data, and was able to put numbers to that. So that jives with what a lot of people have been saying for a long time. But that was a really interesting project to lay that out.
Yeah, it was actually really cool to read and actually kind of like, huh.
Yeah, Jared Merkel, wasn't it?
Yep, Jared Merkel, Kurt Smith, and Brian Mueller.
He volunteered for me when he was an undergraduate at University of Arizona. Mapped some fences for me.
Huh.
He's a good friend. I've kept in touch with him.
Yeah, I know I know Brady's got one major burning question. I can't wait for him to ask. So, Brady, is this a good time for you to ask it?
Ooh, burning question.
Yeah, you know the one.
The one?
Yeah, the CWD question.
Oh god.
Oh,
Yeah, I wanted you to touch on what are your thoughts on CWD when it comes to mule deer? And I mean, I think this like notion that older bucks carry CWD, and we're trying to some states are trying to manage for a higher older age class buck harvest. Like, what
yeah.
is CWD and mule deer? Is like it's the thing we should be concerned about? Is it real? Is it a hoax? Is it government conspiracy? Like,
Yeah, it is real. And it's more than a notion that mature bucks, have a higher incidence. It's no doubt, it's been shown everywhere over and over and over again. Mature bucks have much higher incidence than younger bucks. Bucks in general have a much higher incidence than females. We know just in general, I mean, just it's kind of like common sense. The denser the deer population you have, the more more deer you have in a closed area, the faster any disease is going to spread. And certainly CWD is part of that. Um, and so given those are the facts. I mean, those are the facts. Mature bucks have it more than younger bucks. Bucks have it more than does. Higher concentrations of those positive animals are going to spread the disease faster. Those are facts. And so, given those facts, if you have a deer population that has a lot of mature bucks and a lot of deer, you're going to spread CWD. Prevalence is going to be higher. Prevalence is the percent of the animals that have it. Prevalence is going to be higher. It's going to be spread faster. And then if you've got a focal point where CWD prevalence is higher, it's going to spread to other areas faster. And so if you really want to reduce the spread of CWD and reduce the percentage of the population that are positive, having fewer mature bucks on the landscape, having fewer deer in general on the landscape is the way you would manage that disease in a vacuum. Like if you didn't have to concern yourself with people being interested in a lot of mature bucks. And that's not lost on agencies. I mean, we talk about that in the Mule Deer Working Group, that these two things, the true management of the disease and what people like to see are absolute odds with one another. But
mm-hmm.
they are. It's the reality. And Colorado has some pretty good preliminary information that shows areas with higher harvest rates where they've reduced deer populations and not had as many mature mule deer bucks in the field. Those prevalence rates, the percent of the deer that have it, has not gone up as fast. It's something that we're not going to stop. It's going to increase and it's going to spread. Every year we've got some new state or province that has CWD, and so it's going to keep going. But as deer managers, do we just throw up our hands and not try to manage it, or do we try some game management units where we try some of these techniques and see if we can reduce the spread and reduce the prevalence of it? When a deer gets it, it's dead in 2 years. It only lasts about 2 years, and so it does. And early on, there was some models that showed that CWD in high prevalence rates is going to cause deer population reductions. I was skeptical of that at the beginning because there were models, but we're seeing areas like Saskatchewan that has, in some areas, 60-70% of the animals have CWD. And if you read through even our update, the biologists there's places where deer populations are declining, and CWD is a factor in that population decline. So it certainly will cause population declines. So, do we not do anything and just let prevalence rates get so high that it's killing mature bucks and it's killing deer? As a biologist, that doesn't sit well with me. I want to try to do what we can to try to manage herds properly. It's just an unpleasant message. And so whenever you have that, you have people just going crazy on social media saying it's not true, it's a hoax, it's for some reason deer biologists want to kill all your deer. I don't know. But it's just a reality. It's a disease, and it's just kind of science.
Do we know? Go ahead.
I was gonna say, is it always been prevalent and we're just starting to find it more because now we're actually testing it? Is it like it's always been that deer have evolved with, or?
Yeah. No, that's a good question because that comes up. But no, it's definitely began in the Colorado, Wyoming area and spread in prevalence because there's a lot of areas where we've been testing for 15 years and it's not there. Arizona, we test a lot. We're not sitting on our hands. We're testing a lot in the northern and the eastern boundaries of our state because that's where our neighbors have CWD. There's a lot of states throughout the country that we're testing and testing and testing, and then bingo, got a positive. And there's some cases where you go in there and you get one positive, and they've gone in the next year and they've sampled a lot of deer around that area and statewide and other places. And it's a focal area. It started there and it just grows. You can see it growing. It's not something that people started testing and all of a sudden realized it was there. It's like not to divert the conversation, but the SARS-CoV-2 virus that causes COVID. Deer are mostly white-tailed deer, mule deer to a lesser extent. They're susceptible. They can get that virus. They just don't get COVID, but they get exposed to the virus. And they went back and they pulled serum samples from 4 years before COVID hit and the couple of years after COVID hit. And you could see 4 or 5 years, nothing. And then as soon as COVID hit the human population, it shows up in deer all over the place. So this is a case where they went back and proved it was not here. Because they had the same question with that. It was
Do we
not
know
here.
where it came? Do we know where it came from? Sorry, there's a lag. My bad. I didn't mean to cut you off.
CWD?
Yeah, do we know where it came from?
The CWD, it originated out of the pens apparently in Colorado with some captive deer that were there. Elizabeth, Tom Thorne, and Elizabeth. Oh, can't think of her last name, but she was doing her PhD and she was the one that discovered it in there. I've asked, I'm not an expert in CWD, but I know some people that are bona fide national experts, and I've asked them that question. Some people say it's just scrapies, which is a prion disease in domestic sheep that we've known about for hundreds of years. And some people have said it's just scrapies that showed up in deer. And an expert told me that it could have mutated from scrapies. That's a possibility. We don't know. We don't know where it came from. It could have mutated from scrapies, but it's not just scrapies in deer, because when they look at the prions, there's CWD prions and there's scrapie prions. They're different. The CWD could have mutated from scrapie, but I've got a friend in Texas that just keeps asserting that it's just scrapies. It's not a big deal. And the research papers he sends me are pretty clear that they're different. So
it's such a hot button topic. Like, I won't name their names, but there's some people well known that used to have some TV shows in the hunting world that I see on Facebook every now and then, and they just start going off on it. And then you read the comments and they're like, it's never been proven. It's never been proven. Everyone who says it's a thing is lying and all this stuff. And we're just doing the opposite. I'm just like, I'm reading it and they try to make a good point. And that's what's hard about social media, again, is you're reading things. People are trying to be, quote unquote, experts at it. And then people start to agree with it. And everyone's getting on board with like all these conspiracy things. And is it actually a thing? Do we need to worry about it? Do we just let nature take its course? And it's like, it's so conflicting.
Yeah, it's a popular message to say this is nothing. It's a hoax. We don't need to worry about it. I mean, that makes me feel really good. Like, oh, good, because I was worried about it. I mean, it makes me feel good, but it's not the truth. And a friend of mine in Texas that I was talking about this, and he was very much talking about it just being a hoax and not anything we need to worry about. And I told him, well, okay, I'm hearing you say that, and then I'm hearing all of the Western wildlife disease experts say something else, that it is something to worry about, and prion experts saying it is something to worry about. And so I as a scientist, I'm balancing where I'm getting my information from. The whole body of the scientific community dealing with chronic wasting disease, or a couple of my friends that disagree. I mean, it's kind of like consider the source where you're getting your information.
I think the hard part about it is that you have a state agency like Colorado, right? That, and this is, I don't know if they've ever come out and said it. This just from, the optics of it looked like they maybe potentially move some seasons back, some structure, increase permits in some areas where it looked like the intent was to harvest more older age class bucks in an intent to maybe, control or limit the amount of CWD spread, right?
Yep.
And the public perception is like, well, that sucks because there's less mature bucks on the landscape, right?
Right.
there's always this like social dynamic between the science and trying to do maybe what's right for the health of the herd versus the social pressure of, I want to go out and have a good hunt and have an opportunity at an older age class buck. And if you're going to increase the number of prints, you're going to move those tags later in the season, it's going to decrease the likelihood of that being the case. I'm leading with a question. So the question is so much in, when I worked for the division and then, I worked on the working group for mule deer, so much of deer management across the West is social. So you have the science side of it and you have the social science side of it,
Yep.
right? Does that frustrate you?
No,
It
that's
doesn't?
absolutely part of the process. In our mule deer book, we didn't mention that. I was the lead editor with Paul Krausman on ecology and management of mule deer and black-tailed deer in North America. There you go.
This one's my favorite of all time. That someday I'm going to have you sign.
Okay, yeah, perfect. And so in there, there's an image that my son, who's an artist, he got a degree at University of Arizona in art. He drew an illustration in there, and it's a mule deer that's dressed like Bob Ross, the painter that was famous. There's a mule deer dressed like Bob Ross, and he's drawing on an easel. He's drawing this and this thing, and it's the marriage of science and just the sociology part of it, and it's the kind of science and depicts kind of the science and art of what deer management is. But all wildlife belong to the public. All wildlife belong to everybody. And the agencies and the deer biologists in those agencies are the trustees that are responsible for managing that public resource. And so you're not going to have deer biologists just managing deer herds by themselves. That's why there's a lot of outreach. There's citizens on mule deer committees and rewriting mule deer plans. There's a lot of public meetings. There's a lot of opportunities to tell agencies how you want the deer herd managed, because that's just the way wildlife management works in the United States. We manage wildlife for the public. So, that part of it is not frustrating at all. That's absolutely the way it works. But to keep like the Colorado example, I think Colorado absolutely did move some of those seasons in a way that they would kill more mature deer. And that, I don't think that was a secret. They intended. But keep in mind, I think it was just a couple of units where they were testing that out. So those people that say, I want to shoot mature bucks, I only want to hunt mature bucks, that might have been their favorite unit. And that's unfortunate. It's just unfortunate. But it is only a couple of units to see how that works, see if that works. And there's plenty of other units if you like that kind of hunt.
Yeah. It's you hear all the chatter. I don't know. I'm kind of I'm at a point where, and I've been pretty vocal. In fact, I don't know if I should say this or not, but at one point I told the big game director for the state of Utah, and I was like, man, I just feel like if we could cut out a lot of the chatter, like if we had less groups, if we had less public input, like I honestly feel like we would be better off, because I think we would allow, biologists to make decisions, and it's so hard. So being a member of the public, obviously I haven't worked for the state for a long time, so I haven't had a lot of these like discussions that and I don't think about the things probably day to day that I used to. But man, just the public perception of wildlife management, I just wish that the breadth of it was larger, which is why I like having guys like you on, is just to give people a heads up as to like, man, this thing is so much more, vast than a lot of us give it credit to.
Yeah. So we have to have the public has to be involved in helping, informing us what they'd like to see. We had a biologist that used to always say, there's this wide range of biological sideboards for us to manage a deer population. For example, you could think about buck-to-doe ratios. We could manage buck-to-doe ratios at 8 bucks per 100 does, and all the fawns, all the does are pretty much going to get bred. We could manage that population to be 60 bucks per 100 does. And biologically, you're not going to affect the abundance of the deer population. But socially, there's a narrower band of acceptable buck-to-doe ratios. I mean, people would love to see the 60 per 100, but if you see the 60% per 100, there's lots and lots of people that aren't going to be able to get a deer tag because you have to restrict it so much to get 60 per 100 bucks per 100 does. So that's you got a whole segment of the population that really wouldn't like that. But we've got a lot of people that really don't want $8 per 100 does. So the social management sideboards are narrower than biologically.
Yeah.
And that's just part of management. That's what we do. I think that's a good way to visualize that there's biological that would be perfectly acceptable from a deer management standpoint, but then they're not going to be acceptable. Same thing with like hunt success. What percent of the hunters are successful? We could have 5% of the hunters being successful, and it doesn't hurt the deer herd. And we could have 70% of the hunters be successful and have nothing but spikes out there, and still get the does pregnant. But that's not really socially acceptable. It's a narrower band.
Yeah. Yeah. Any take on Utah's approach to buck-to-doe ratios? I'm sure
you're all friends of mine, so that's a really
tough
question.
I know.
In Arizona, when I look at states like Nevada and states like I forgot what Utah's buck-to-doe ratio is, but some of these states are running really high buck-to-doe ratios. I think Nevada, 40-50% of the bucks harvested are 4x4 mule deer. When I look at that, I would love to see more people be able to go deer hunting, and less 4x4s out there. Probably not a popular answer with a lot of people listening right now, but if you've got people sitting home and they can't go deer hunting with family and friends, and 50% of the bucks harvested are 4x4s, there's a lot of opportunity being missed right there for people to get some venison in the freezer.
Yeah. Yeah, it goes back to social dynamics and social desire, right? I am interested to see, because I know that Utah, that we kind of changed a bunch of our general season units. What historically had been like 18 to 21, now we're down to like 15 to 17, I think, which isn't crazy, but I think it'll be interesting to see post, because I mean Brock makes a compelling argument that maybe potentially lowering those ratios will free up some space or some vittles on the landscape to produce fawns, right? Which may in turn actually increase and improve the overall population, which I think is interesting. I know that this year's it's only a snapshot, right? But I've sure seen a lot of really nice bucks taken early on this season in the state of Utah. So we're only in that first year. So it'll be really interesting to see post, 3 years if Mother Nature, what's interesting, and I know you have a hard out right here in a few minutes.
1:30.
Okay.
I've got time.
You got it, man. One thing I wanted to ask you about is so Utah, we try this, right? We're going to lower the buck-to-doe ratios in general season units based on some collar data and some information. How do you tease apart the impact of that? Maybe Mother Nature just cooperates for the next 3 years. Maybe.
Yeah, that's hard. And that happens when you're talking about predator control. You go in there and you control predators, and then you get a wet, you get a really mild winter, or you get a really wet summer, and things go great, and everybody says, "Look at the good we did," and it's confounded with these other things going on. So that can certainly happen. And anytime you do research on a deer population, you've got this dynamics of all things. Kind of things happening, but there's ways that Brock and Randy can tease some of that out with all of the data they have, whether it's models or something else. Sometimes you can tease out those effects, and separate them. But we'll see. Wasn't it Brock that was on your podcast that talked about that? Yeah, I remember that. That was a really interesting. Yeah. And I've talked to Brock afterwards about that, and we've got a mule deer working group. We've produced these 46 fact sheets that we have on our website about individual things like predator control, winter feeding, elk competition, all kinds of interesting things about mule deer. And one of them we want to write, led by the Utah folks. I think it started with Justin Shannon, but with Dax and Covey. One we want to write is, they want to name it "Bucks Don't Have Babies" and talk about buck-to-doe ratios and reproduction. And I don't know if I think that's just a working title, but we decided to put that on hold until Brock's data came out. They're publishing that, what you're talking about. And so once that's published through the peer review process, it's going to be, you'll have to have them back on. It'd be
I think
really,
we need to make a t-shirt for that too when that comes out.
Yeah.
That might get you canceled. Yeah, that's it's interesting. If you could go ahead, did you have a question?
Yeah, no. When you said my hot topic question, I had two of them. The other one I thought you were leaning towards is I wonder if you could speak on the competition between elk and mule deer.
Yeah,
you hear it all the time. see all these elk out
Yep.
there. I don't see mule deer. Elk populations are doing so well. It seems like everywhere.
Yep.
Is there a correlation between elk and mule deer in terms of competition?
In places, and we have a fact sheet on that that's just one page front and back, and our fact sheets are kind of like, just like you're saying right now, like, okay, what's the deal on this topic? Just give me the short, a short version. And so we have a fact sheet on that. When we started talking about that, was one of our earlier, I said, the mule deer working group. When we first got together, we had 7 topics that we listed. One of those was elk and mule deer competition. That was one of the things that everybody was talking about.
Mm-hmm.
We've got elk populations increasing throughout the West, especially like in the 90s. Mule deer populations declining. Elk would be something that would be ubiquitous throughout the West. So maybe that was like the thing that was causing mule deer declines throughout the West. So we actually wrote a chapter in one of our books on elk and mule deer interactions. That was 2003. We did that book, and we looked at all the literature. The most significant piece of literature at that time had just come out, and it was Fred Lindsay, who wrote a summary just on elk and mule deer interactions throughout the West competition. That was in 1997. He had just come out with that, and he looked at populations all over the West where some cases elk populations were increasing and mule deer populations were increasing with them because environmental conditions were good for both of them. In some cases, they were both declining. Again, environmental conditions. Some cases, elk were going up, mule deer were going down, or mule deer were going up and elk were going down. His conclusion after looking at populations throughout the West was you can't make any kind of broad brush statement about competition. It depends. Like and biologists always say it depends. But think about a situation where you've got like the Kaibab Plateau, you've got all these deer up on summer range, they go down to winter range. There's a handful of elk on the Kaibab Plateau that found their way on there. I mean, that obviously is not, the competition is not a big deal if you have a dozen elk or however many we have up there. You've got probably other situations you do where you've got a big elk population and they're coming down onto the same kind of winter range as is mule deer maybe a smaller mule deer population, and elk could be out competing mule deer in that situation. So it's kind of an unsatisfying answer from me, but it does depend on the situation. Do you have a lot of elk and a few mule deer? Do you have limited winter range, or do you have tons of winter range? It depends on the individual situation. Overall, it's not like elk are causing mule deer declines, but there's some areas where elk are probably major competitors. And so when we wrote that book that you just held up, instead of a chapter, a section on elk and mule deer interactions and competition, we did a chapter just on competition. And we talked about, for example, the explosion of aoudad populations in West Texas and what that's doing to destroy desert bighorn sheep and desert mule deer populations in West Texas. And then you've got feral horses in Nevada and a lot of other places, and the competition with mule deer. So it's more than just deer and elk. And we did that in that chapter. We looked at all of those other ungulates that can be and sometimes seriously competing with our mule deer.
Yeah, I have a funny trail cam photo that maybe I'll text you when I dig it up again, or maybe I'll share it later after my hunting season's over. But I got a really good bull elk on a water source, a decent mule deer drinking out of the same water source at the same time, and then like 5 feral horses drinking on the water source.
Oh, wow.
So like, ultimately they're like intermingling together, obviously because limited resource.
Yep.
But they're all there, and it's like you can see one side's horses, one side's this big bull elk, and there's a mule deer in the same photo, like all drinking out of this tank.
That's amazing. Because in a lot of cases in Nevada, those horses are dominating those water sources and driving everything, bighorn sheep out of there. That's interesting.
Brady, you know what I have to say about increasing elk herds? Hell yes.
Yeah, you're not worried, right?
Just for this podcast.
Just kidding. Jim, if you could wave your finger and fix like one problem for mule deer, what would it be?
You can't do that. You can't do that. Someone asked me that, and I jokingly said wolves, and we all laughed. Yeah, and like we've been talking about, you can't. You can't put your finger on one thing. We talked about drought and winter kill. But there's more than that. There's like in some of the forested environments that haven't had disturbance in the forest, those forests are just maturing and maturing, and they're getting less productive and less productive. And in some cases, there's a lot more timber harvest back 60s and 70s, clearing those out, a lot more openings and clear cuts and all that productivity that we talked about there. You've got some cases where you've got AHD. There's a lot of talk in eastern whitetail about EHD, epizootic hemorrhagic disease. There's an adenovirus hemorrhagic disease that has affected a few populations. And if you read our 2025 status summary, a couple of the biologists talk about some areas of the state being impacted by disease. So sometimes you've got disease decreases. The whitetail people, I haven't kept track on the EHD issues in eastern whitetail, but there's some herds that are getting hammered right now this year. I think Ohio and some areas around there. So sometimes disease is impacting even our western populations in there, and lack of shrub cover. If there is one thing that I think people should focus on, I think it would be shrubs. You just look at the landscape. Shrubs provide so much nutrition. They need the nutrients in the forbs, which are the weeds, the broadleaf weeds that grow after rain, but those dry up and they get covered with snow. And so it's really the shrubs that sustain animals through droughts when everything else is dry and crispy, and through heavy winters because they're up above the snow, provide nutrition. So, shrubs is something that are just intertwined with mule deer, good habitat, mule deer health. Yeah. There's one thing to think about is kind of shrub layer, shrub covers. Is the canopy closed up and there's no shrubs underneath the forest? It's like ponderosa pine and pine needles. Or is it open enough that you've got buckbrush and New Mexican locust and sagebrush in areas, and gamble oak coming up, aspen coming up because of the sunlight hitting the ground?
So maybe really continuing to work habitat, both summer range and winter range, and increasing shrub components with them. And
shrub component in summer and winter range, and even like we talked about that transitional range that they may be in 2 months in the fall and 2 months in the spring, coming back and forth.
Gotcha. That's good. Brady, any other burning questions that you had?
I don't have any burning questions. Are you working on anything new right now in terms of reports or book or anything like
that? Yeah, Miriam's elk genetics.
Yes.
Yeah. You might have seen some of that. Yeah. I don't know if you want to talk about it. If you want to.
Yeah.
Okay, just a little a snippet. In the Southwest, we had a subspecies of elk called the Miriam's elk, which supposedly went extinct about 1906 was the last report. And they say it was Arizona, New Mexico, and the highlands of the central Arizona and New Mexico went extinct. There were 3 specimens saved for science. So all we know about the whole subspecies is 3 specimens. There's never been a description about how it differed physically. Genetics was never in play. No one's ever done work to see if it differed genetically. So there's a subspecies that whenever people talk about elk in North America, they name the subspecies and they talk about this extinct subspecies of Miriam's elk in the Southwest. But really, what support is there that this wasn't just an extension of southern Colorado elk coming into northern New Mexico and the Mogollon Rim, the Gila National Forest? And so about 20 years ago, I teamed up with a geneticist and we did this real rudimentary genetic analysis of one of the 3 samples that was in museums and that we knew about. And we found that there was some difference there. It wasn't very conclusive. In hindsight, the genetic analysis we used was so primitive, it was almost worthless by today's standards. It was just really primitive. And so our agency has interest in answering that question. Was there really a different elk? And some of the interest in answering that question is because sometimes you hear people say, well, the elk you have now are invasive exotics. It's not the elk that Arizona and New Mexico had. And so we need to reduce them or get rid of them because they're hurting the forest and that kind of thing. And, some of us think, well, how different really could they have been with that connection through Colorado? So that's the impetus and the drive to let's try to answer this question with the modern genetic analysis we have. So there's a geneticist, Emily Latch, I've worked with and published genetics papers with for more than 20 years. She's at University of Wisconsin, Milwaukee. We hired a PhD student to do her PhD on this project to answer the question. And so I went to the American Museum in New York and to the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C., and we all went with the Emily and the student went to the Field Museum of Natural History in Chicago and sampled known Miriam elk samples from 100 years ago. There was only 3 in existence, but after I spent a week at Smithsonian and a couple days at the American Museum, we were up to 10 now that they had that were just not categorized as Miriam elk. Like an old New Mexico elk. They just had Cervus canadensis from New Mexico, but it was before any Yellowstone elk were brought in, so it was a native Miriam elk. So things like that. So we now have about 10 known Miriam elk in museums, and they've extracted DNA from them. We also collected some 100-year-old specimens in Colorado, 100 elk specimens, 100-year-old elk specimens from Yellowstone, where all Arizona, New Mexico elk came from in 1913. But so the last Miriam's elk was documented in 1906. The first Yellowstone elk were brought in to restore elk populations in 1913. So we've got just a little 6-year, 7-year span there. And so the question is always, first of all, were they different? And second of all, if they were different, if we can find a genetic difference that 100-year-old Miriam's elk were different than 100-year-old surrounding elk in Yellowstone, then can we look at today's Arizona, New Mexico elk populations genetically, and is there any evidence of whatever that Miriam's elk, unique Miriam's elk genetics is there any of that made it through that gauntlet of 7 years and exists in the Southwest? So that's where we're at. I have to leave you hanging on the edge of your seat.
Yeah.
Have the results back. I'm going back to I found 2 more Miriam elk samples in the American Museum in New York. Next month, I'm going back and getting those 2. And then the University of California, Berkeley in Oakland, California has a really good museum collection, and they have 2 Miriam elk that the graduate student found in their collection. So I'm going back at the end of this month, getting those 2. So it's a pretty exciting project. I think it's pretty interesting.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. Hopefully they got bigger antlers. That's what I'm hoping.
Yeah, some people talked about bigger antlers, but the few specimens that were collected were big, old, mature bulls. And some people said they were shaped differently, but there was one that was like, it had to be about a 20-year-old bull. All of the molars are just ground down to the edge of the skull, and the antlers were more compact, shorter tines. It's just a regressed old bull.
Yeah, right.
And some people have shown pictures of that and said this is a typical Miriam elk. That's how they differ from Rocky Mountain elk. But there's other specimens that are just giant. They look like Rocky Mountain elk. So.
Is that? I'm curious. So you talk about genetics and doing profiles, and it's a crazy time that we live in. What is the future of like wildlife science and wildlife management? And one of the things, that always pops into my mind is, you start talking about things like CRISPR, right? Where you can go in and actually change a gene.
Yeah.
Do you get involved in these kind of like
I get involved in discussions, not the actual work of that kind of gene editing. Have you read my article on dire wolves?
Yeah.
The dire wolf, colossal bioscience. That's what I was going to bring up right now. Don't let colossal bioscience figure it out about these milk. And
there's a lot of
say they brought them back.
Yeah, there's a lot of bad misinformation and sometimes outright lies with some of the results of the colossal bioscience and stuff with dire wolves, and saying they're bringing back Tasmanian tigers, which is no way they can. Saying they're bringing back woolly mammoths, and all they're doing is they're editing in a furry gene into an Indian elephant. They're going to have a furry Indian elephant. And what's dangerous is they're talking about like releasing them in the Arctic to improve the environment, and it's just ridiculous. It's just nonsense, absolute nonsense. But your question about gene editing, it could, in some cases, that stuff could be used mostly with endangered species, not with anything else. We're not going to find a big double drop tine gene and edit that into a bunch of mule deer captivity.
Or maybe use it for chronic wasting disease.
Yeah, that's for me, I guess.
That's a good. I'm glad you brought that up, because there's people in the captive cervid industry that there is a gene in the CWD discussion that makes those animals not die in 2 years, not die as fast. So there's people in captivity trying to breed and concentrate that gene, saying that they want to release those animals into the wild. A couple problems with that. One is if you've got animals that don't die within 2 years, but they actually live 3 or 4, now you've got an animal that's shedding that infectious prion in the environment for 4 years instead of 2 years. That's a really bad idea. They're not CWD proof animals. They're not resistant. they just don't die as fast, which means they're more infectious for a longer period of time. That's a bad deal. Also, if you're breeding for one particular trait, like the CWD gene that some people want, you're also, along with that, breeding for other traits that are connected to that gene. Anything that's close to that gene on the chromosome is going to come along with those animals that are bred for that trait. And there could be other genes on, like, less maternal investment, or lower milk quality, or smaller antlers, or a higher susceptibility to some other disease. There could be all kinds of things coming along with that are not good. We don't want people cooking these animals up in captivity and then releasing them into wild populations. That's a really, really bad idea. And I think it was Oklahoma's legislature that threw a ton of money into funding that sort of thing. And it's not a good idea. That is not going to solve the CWD issue. A lot of people saying, well, we're just going to breed our way out of this problem. And it's not possible. It's not going to happen.
Yeah, my head went to bighorn sheep and pneumonia, right? So I was like, man, if we could somehow administer some sort of CRISPR, go in and eliminate.
That's potentially possible. Definitely possible.
We could have bighorn sheep all over again, Brady. You might get a tag one time.
Mm-hmm. That'd be great someday.
And not only have sheep more, but we could relax restrictions on domestic sheep and goats in some Western allotments. I mean, there's potential for that, but we need to proceed very cautiously when we start doing that.
For sure. Well, that's all I had, Jim. Brady, do you have any others you want to hit on?
I just want to reiterate that I think so highly of you. You're a legend to me. Let's talk to you this whole time when I see you at shows and shake your hand and hang out. So full of knowledge. Like, I appreciate everything.
We should hang out more at shows.
Exactly. I always see you when we're like running around going to the next thing. That's what the hard part is about those things. But no, like I said, I picked up that book earlier, CWD Management, a Blacktail and Mule Deer of North America. Awesome book. I have your other one right here, Deer of the Southwest. Yeah. When I moved down here, like, this was like, I don't know, my mule deer Bible for the longest time. Like, wear it out, read everything on it. And I highly suggest people check out those books. I don't know what the printing is on those, but sometimes they're hard to find on the old interwebs. But
Deer of the Southwest is available. Should be available on Amazon. It's available on my website, deernut.com. That one I'm proud of because I took my time and I just pulled all the information I could find together with cows, whitetail, and desert mule deer. The big mule deer and black-tailed deer in North America book is not like a bedtime story. It's full of it has 23 chapters, each written by a group of experts led by, like, the expert for that topic. 500 pages, 100 color images, 82 different co-authors, all of them experts in mule deer and black-tailed deer, went into writing that. That's going to be the Bible for mule deer probably forever. By the time that needs to be updated, they're not going to be doing books. They're not going to be printing books anymore, probably.
I want them to keep doing books forever.
I know. I agree. I've got some gems behind me. Some of them signed by some famous people and some I really value. And
you can just upload it.
People don't value books anymore.
Yeah, I mean, to that point, I would say most people that probably listen to our podcast, or they listen to it for hunting content, right? They're hunters, and I think Brady is the poster child. If you want to be a better hunter, the number one thing I think you can do is familiarize yourself with the behavior of the animal that you're pursuing. Mm-hmm. And if you really want to understand mule deer, and you want to understand, you say cow's deer, we say coos deer.
That was one I wanted to touch on, but I want us to
some of us have to be right.
That's right. Yeah, I'm going to defer to you on this one. I'll just say that cows is the redneck way of saying it, which is the way I grew up. So I'll go with cows or coos.
Coos. Have you read my article I wrote for Arizona Wildlife?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Because I for a long time wanted to pull that information together and put it in one place.
Yeah, but buy your book. I mean, this is a plug for your book. Hopefully people got information out of this that you can use. But I still think the best thing you can do to be a better hunter is just familiarize yourself with the animal. And your book's a great place to start on what deer eat, why they live where they live, what their nutritional needs are like. I think the more you can learn about an animal, the better hunter you'll be. So just a plug for your book.
And that's too. You mentioned your website, Deer Nut, like your logo.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Great logo. All the
Yeah,
different resources on there too. You have all your podcast appearances. I listen to like all of them, and just like knowledge power, soak up all that information and utilize it hunting or whatever else it could be, helping out mule deer, whatever you can do. It's like the
yeah.
more stuff we get out there, the better, I think, and I love learning about it.
Yeah, I think that's very true. And my Instagram is at Cervidnut, CERVIDNUT, and it's kind of a mixed bag. You'll get silly stuff, and then you get something on pronghorn evolution, and
the cheetah thing. Everyone always points to it. That's why they evolved to be so fast. That's everyone points to. Even Rogan talks about that all the time.
Not true. Fake news.
I've said this before, so not true. Then it's not true.
It's not true. I've written it several times in magazine articles years ago, and then started doing the research. And for those that haven't read it, they say the pronghorn got its speed from the North American cheetah, which we apparently had a North American cheetah. But when you look at it, the pronghorn family was built for speed for 18 million years, and the cheetah came along about 2 million years ago. So it can't account for that speed. And then even more recent analysis of what they call the North American cheetah shows that it's really more like a mountain lion. It's more kind of like a precursor to the mountain lion, and not necessarily. It was built for more speed than the mountain lion, but it's not like we had a full-blown African cheetah running around chasing pronghorn.
More spot and stock style. Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, thanks, Jim. I appreciate your time, man. You were very generous today. That was on short notice and awesome conversation. We hope to catch up with you next time we see you.
Yeah, definitely. I always enjoy it.
Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you.
All right. You bet. See ya.